Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into something that, honestly, to the outside world, often looks like a completely chaotic, dizzying maze. I'm talking about the massive multi-party landscape of Indian politics. It seems entirely unpredictable, right? But what if I told you there's actually this brilliant, highly structured evolution hiding right beneath the surface? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. Let's reveal that hidden structure together. Here is our roadmap for The Explainer. First, defining coalitions. Second, the one-party era. Third, the rise of coalitions. And finally, number 4, uncovering today's bipolar reality. Okay, Section 1, defining coalition governments and understanding the rules of the game. Let's jump right in. So, to really grasp Indian politics, we've got to understand what a coalition actually means in this specific context. The word itself comes from the Latin coalitio, which literally means to move together. It's a collaborative effort. But here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. It's a government where different parties come together without losing their individual identities. They team up to gain power, but they remain wonderfully, distinctly separate. To make this whole thing work, these allies have to practice what's often called coalition dharma. It's kind of like an unwritten duty where parties have to drop their most rigid ideological stances. For instance, historically, the BJP had to sideline long-held goals, like the Uniform Civil Code, just to keep their coalition partners happy. Instead of sticking to extremes, they forge a common minimum program that everyone can at least tolerate. This setup also heavily relies on outside support, which means parties vote with the government without officially joining it. And somewhat hilariously, this often leads to massive, incredibly bloated ministries just to give everyone a fancy title and keep the peace. Moving on to Section 2, the one-party era, spanning from 1952 to 1967. Let's travel back for a second to a time right after independence, when the idea of a national coalition seemed completely unnecessary. As you can see on this timeline, we start with a baseline in 1946. There was a pre-independence interim government that functioned somewhat like a coalition, featuring the Congress, the Muslim League, and a few others, mostly due to communal pressures. But by the first general election in 1952, India entered a solid 15-year stretch where a single party essentially ruled uncontested at the center. Take a look at this detailed flowchart we pulled from the source material. It maps out this historical journey beautifully. If you focus on that very first box at the top left, it represents absolute single-party domination by the Indian National Congress. But as you follow the arrows across the chart to the right, you can watch the entire system inevitably fracture into some serious complexity. So you might be wondering, why did the Congress dominate so completely at first? Well, it actually wasn't because they captured some overwhelming majority of the popular vote. Instead, they had the halo of the independence struggle, plus the undeniable charisma of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. But structurally, they won so easily because the anti-Congress sentiment was just incredibly fragmented. The opposition votes were completely split among dozens of smaller, heavily disorganized parties. But then we hit this number, 283. Out of 520 Lok Sabha seats in the 1967 elections, the Congress secured only 283. It was a massive setback. The aura of the independence struggle was fading, Nehru had passed away, and that era of absolute, unshakable dominance was officially beginning to crack. Which brings us to Section 3, the rise of coalitions, fractures, volatility, and experiments. That cracking foundation we just talked about led the opposition to a fundamental realization. To survive and actually challenge the dominant power, they absolutely had to band together. Look at the milestones of this volatile period. It kicks off in 1977, evolves by 1989 with the National Front, and completely peaks in the sheer, unpredictable instability of 1996. The 1977 Janata Party experiment is a really fascinating one. Technically, several diverse groups formally merged into one single party on paper, just to defeat the Congress. But functionally, our sources classify this as India's very first true coalition government at the center. Unsurprisingly, because they really only united out of pure convenience, clashing loyalties caused the government to quickly collapse. Fast forward to the 1990s, and the volatility is literally off the charts. 13. That is the exact number of days A.B. Vajpayee's first BJP government lasted in 1996. He was invited to form the government, but he simply couldn't find coalition partners to support him, forcing him to resign almost immediately. Just 13 days. I mean, this entire era was just characterized by intense, constant tension. Governments like the 1989 National Front or the 1996 United Front heavily relied on that outside support we mentioned earlier, getting backing from massive parties like the BJP, the left, or the Congress. Think about what that meant. A ruling government could collapse completely, overnight, if just one supporting party got upset and decided to withdraw its backing. And guess what? That happened multiple times. But all of this chaos eventually built to a massive turning point. 24. The successful 1999 National Democratic Alliance, the NDA government, required an alliance of exactly 24 different political parties just to run the country. On paper, that sounds like a recipe for total disaster. But against all odds, they largely completed their term, finally proving that large-scale coalitions could actually provide stability in India. But, as this really powerful quote from our source material highlights, managing a government of 24 distinct regional parties is no walk in the park. The coalition government is always under demands and compromise. The prime minister has to play politics of expediency. Every single regional partner has a specific demand for their home state, and managing that requires an intense, almost daily mastery of compromise. All right, Section 4, the bipolar reality. Two solar systems emerge. Out of all this experimentation, all this chaos and compromise, something truly remarkable happened. Indian politics essentially reorganized itself around two massive ideological forces. For decades, it was anti-Congressism, a negative rallying cry that united incredibly diverse, sometimes totally opposed regional parties, purely to fight the dominance of the Congress. But as the BJP rose to prominence, a new negative factor took shape: anti-BJPism. The sources note that these two negative factors, rather than any positive unifying ideologies, became the real drivers of modern political alliances. By 1999 with the BJP-led NDA, and then by 2004 with the Congress-led UPA, both of these major national parties realized a really hard truth. They simply could not govern alone anymore. So they began systematically curating these massive, formal alliances, bringing dozens of regional parties under their respective umbrellas. They became the two modern behemoths. Which brings us to a really fascinating question. With hundreds of registered political parties actively participating in elections across a deeply diverse nation, is India actually moving toward a two-party system? The source text visualizes this with a diagram it calls a stasiological panorama. I know, it sounds a bit academic, but just think of it like a giant binary solar system. The Congress and the BJP act as the two giant suns right in the middle. Orbiting around them are the regional parties acting as planets. Some are firmly pro-Congress, some firmly pro-BJP. Others orbit as anti-forces, or they just offer that crucial outside support from a distance. It's a multi-party reality, but it's functioning entirely with bipolar mechanics. So what is the big takeaway from all of this? First, in a country as incredibly vast and diverse as India, coalitions aren't just an accident, they're practically inevitable. Second, while one single party used to try and represent all that diversity, it is now represented dynamically through these vast alliances. And finally, what looks from the outside like a messy multi-party democracy has actually matured into a highly structured, stable, bipolar game of alliances. I love this profound thought from the source text because it perfectly summarizes the entire evolution. To ensure the compulsions of stability with the beauty of diversity, it is necessary to have new rules of the game. India hasn't broken its democratic system at all. It has just gracefully adapted it. To balance the desperate need for a stable government with the beautiful, massive diversity of its people, it simply had to invent new rules. We'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. We've seen how decades of multi-party chaos have evolved into this highly structured, bipolar dance of two giant alliances. But in a country as dynamic as India, will this bipolarity last forever, or will a new, third force eventually rise up and break the system all over again? Thank you so much for joining us on The Explainer today. Keep asking questions and keep exploring.